In this lesson, we'll learn about some of the common tools and areas where we can work with type in popular Adobe design programs. Okay, before we get started, I'd like to say that Digital Tutors would like to say thank you to iStock Photo and the artists Spiderstock, G. Brunden, and Jeremy for their images that were used in this course. You can access these same images and thousands of others by accessing your exclusive Digital Tutors iStock discount at the following site. Alright, now if you are new to the Adobe set of applications, then you should know that working with type in these programs is a little bit different than your average word processor. You know, maybe you're used to working in a program like Microsoft Word. You should know that these set of applications offer a vastly different tool set for working with your type. So let's go ahead and get started and look at some of the commonalities between the applications Illustrator, InDesign, and Photoshop. So here I am in Illustrator, and the first thing you should know is that there are a couple of common areas for controlling the look of your type in all three of these applications. And you can find those if you don't have them open already by coming up here to the Window drop-down menu. And in Illustrator, we're going to come down and look under the Type heading here. So we'll fly this menu out to the right, and the first panel we're going to grab is the Character panel. Now, the Character panel is where you can control character formatting for type that you've created. In this panel, you can change the typeface, the type style. You can also increase, decrease the type size, adjust leading, kerning, tracking, things like of that nature. So in Illustrator, this is what the Character panel looks like. Let me go ahead and bounce over here to InDesign, and we're going to open the same panel. You can also find that under Window, and then come down to Type and Tables in InDesign, and we're going to open the Character panel here. So notice here the panel looks very, very similar. If we come over here to Photoshop and we look under Window, notice here that we don't have a type or little flyout menu here. We need to come up here and actually just choose the Character panel. But in doing that, you can see here that all three of these panels have a very similar look and a very similar feel to them. Now, whereas Photoshop has the ability to mouse over some of these values here, and we can actually see that our cursor changes, and in doing that we can actually click and drag and adjust these values. If we come over and look in applications like Illustrator or InDesign, notice we can't do that. We don't get that cursor change when we mouse over here. But instead we actually do have a button here for up and down on each one of these fields where we can manually click and change these values. Alright, so again, in the Character panel, we can control the formatting for our characters. Let me go ahead and open up another panel here that is common to all three of these applications. I'm going to come over to the Window drop-down again, and again in Illustrator, we're going to look under Type, and we're going to open up the Paragraph panel. So the Paragraph panel is going to control formatting that is exclusive to the paragraphs that you create. So you can see here we have alignment options, we have indentation options, even some hyphenation options. Now again, when we look in some of these other applications, you're going to notice here that the Paragraph panel looks just a little bit different. So we'll come over here and open that same panel in InDesign, and you can see that there's actually quite a few more settings for this panel in InDesign than there are in Illustrator. And if we come over here to Photoshop, you're going to have to look under Window and just find the Paragraph panel. It's right here. And again, it looks like sort of a scaled down version of this panel. So you can see here in bouncing back and forth between all three of these applications, these panels look just a little bit different, but essentially they're going to control the same settings. Now, one thing that you should be aware of is that in Illustrator and in InDesign, we've got this little sort of button next to our panel tab here. Now, if your panel doesn't have this many options in it, you may come up here and just click this little button next to the word Character, for example, because in Illustrator and InDesign, these panels have three different states. So we can have these panels halfway open, we can have them completely collapsed, or we can have them all the way open here, exposing all of these options available to us. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about creating type in these three applications. Adobe's done a really good job of using the same tool to create type in each one of these programs. It's called the Type tool, and in all three of these applications you can actually even get to it using the same keyboard shortcut. It's simply T on your keyboard. Now you can see here in Illustrator the Type tool sits right here in your tool panel on the left, and let's go ahead and bounce over here to Photoshop. If we hit T, you can see that it's right down here in the tool panel in Photoshop. InDesign, again, keyboard shortcut T, and you'll see that it activates the type tool here. Now I'm going to go ahead and bounce back over here to Illustrator, and I'm going to show you a couple of different methods for creating type. Now, you may hear some terms thrown around like area type or even point type. If you hear those things, those are actually terms related to the way you're creating your type. So let me go ahead and talk to you a little bit about point type. Point type is just simply created by clicking somewhere in your active area in your document here. So I've done that here in Illustrator, and you can see I've got a flashing text insertion cursor here. So let's just go ahead and begin typing here. I'm going to just type in some words. You can see here that using this method of point type, we are actually able to create an infinite amount of type on one line. This line is never going to wrap to an additional line. The only way to actually force this cursor down to the next line is to actually create a hard return by hitting enter. And you can see here that our text cursor moves down to the line below the line we actually begin typing on. This is actually called point type. Now let me go ahead and just delete this here. I'm going to go ahead and grab this and delete that. Let me go ahead and show you what area type is. Area type is just simply using our type tool, and we're just simply going to draw an area that we want to create type in. And let's just go ahead and drag a box, sort of like that. And we'll just begin typing here. You can see here in area type, the difference is the type has a little area that it lives in. Once it reaches the boundary of this area, it's automatically going to wrap to a new line. Now, you may hear this area defined a couple of different ways, basically depending on which application you're working in. You may hear it called a text box. You may hear it called a text frame if you're working here in InDesign. It's going to work exactly the same way. Now, InDesign and Illustrator are also similar in that we can use our selection arrow, this black arrow right here, to grab our type and move it around, and even resize this text frame that we've created. We can do this in both Illustrator and InDesign. And you can see here, they work in a very similar fashion. Now, Photoshop, on the other hand, is going to work just a little differently. Let me go ahead and grab that type tool here, and I'm going to go ahead and drag a box here. It looks a little bit different than the other two applications. But again, we're going to be able to create type that actually flows to the next line if it extends to the boundary of this box. And you can see that we've even got type here that is quite a bit too large. So let me just shrink that down some here. All right. Now, notice here that if we grab our black arrow in Photoshop, our selection tool, we can move our type around. But if we begin trying to transform this box, we're actually going to start stretching our type. So you need to know that when working with type in Photoshop, you need to make these type of changes with your text tool. So let me just click in there, get our text insertion cursor in on our type, and you can see that we've got some transform controls. Now, using my type tool, I'm going to adjust these transformation controls, and you can see that our box that's containing our type actually changes, but we're not moving the type around. We're not transforming it, deforming it, anything like that. So I tell you what, Photoshop does work a little differently in the fact that when you create type in Photoshop, it's actually going to create a type layer here in your type, or excuse me, rather, in your layers panel. Now, part of the reason for this is that Photoshop is a raster application, meaning it's pixel-based, and this text layer is going to create vectors for the text. Now, we're getting a little bit out of my scope for this lesson here, but know that Illustrator and InDesign are both vector-based applications, so we've got text objects here for both the text that we've created. All right, now with that said, feel free to go ahead and begin playing with both these two panels, sort of exploring the settings here. All these panels have little flyout menus here in the top right hand corner that have a little different options, and these options vary from application to application. And when you come back in the next lesson, we'll pick up where we're leaving off here, and we'll make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to type terminology.